Cool. Thank you, Dr. Nathan. All right. So without further ado, like always in these live lessons, if you have a question, just put it in the chat and then I'll kind of stop in between and get to those questions, or you can just wait to ask it then. But yeah, I definitely want to get to all your guys' questions, and we have a small group, so plenty of time probably for questions when we get through these. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. So things we covered, we're doing private pilot rules and regulations. We already covered all this stuff. So these are all recorded in your bonus downloads and video course live lessons that we did on these subjects here, all on private pilot rules and regulations. We did all these. We haven't done minimum safe altitudes. We're going to do that today. We haven't done aircraft maintenance, supplemental oxygen, or scuba diving. We'll do all those today. And then I think we're going to do one more, a part 7 on flight planning, airport light signals, land and hold short operations, night definitions, and incidents, accidents, and emergencies. So we'll do those hopefully maybe next week or a week after if things don't get too crazy on me, but hopefully next week. All right. So without further ado, let's get to minimum safe altitudes. All right. Minimum safe altitudes. This is from FAR 91.119. Minimum safe altitudes general. There's 4 areas that dictate what our minimum altitudes must be. And I spelled ARE wrong. That should say OUR. So, but there's 4 areas that dictate what our minimum altitudes must be. So what are those areas? Well, anywhere. That's one of the areas the FAA defines. This just means that at all times and anywhere you're flying. Okay. So this is the kind of the encompassing rule that you absolutely have to meet. And we'll get to what that is in a bit. Then you have the FAA says congested. This refers to a city, town, settlement, or open assembly of persons. So open assembly of persons would be like, I think of like an outdoor concert or a large picnic or something like that, right? So it's open air, it's outside, but there's a bunch of people around. Then we have other than congested. So that's another definition the FAA uses. This area fills in the gap between anywhere and congested. So, it's not anywhere, but it's not congested. So it kind of fills in that gap between those two. So not quite a city or large gathering of people, but also not just over a desert with nobody, no living souls or structures, right? And then we have within that other than congested, to define that, the FAA uses terms like open water, like flying over the ocean or a lake. And then they use the term sparsely populated, which would be like over a farm with a farmhouse and a barn, right? Where there's just a bunch of cattle or something, or just fields of wheat or something, and then there's a farmhouse. That would be like sparsely populated. All right. So what are the requirements in each of these areas? Well, we have anywhere, like I said. So this is the overarching rule that you must operate at an altitude where if a power unit or engine fails, an emergency landing can be made without undue hazard to any persons or property on the surface. So this means you just need to plan your altitudes accordingly, such that if you had no power and had to glide somewhere to land, you could do that without hazard. And airplanes have glide ratios. Every airplane has a different glide ratio. It tells you how far, horizontal distance along the ground you can travel with each, feet you drop in altitude with no power. So you can know that glide ratio, okay, well, if I'm flying, over the city here, I need to be able to glide 2 miles to, get outside the city and land safely in like a field or something in this area of my cross country plan. So that means that I need to be at this altitude to be able to glide there. You can plan ahead like that to meet this requirement. And so I'm going to kind of fill in this picture as we go along. So we have open water over here. This is my little drawing of the ocean. We have a little city here. So that's like a congested area. We have an open assembly of people up here on this hill, right? They're just gathering for like a family get together or something. Then we have sparsely populated where it's just maybe one house, a farmhouse or something, and maybe, a vehicle here. So this person's just flying anywhere, right? Their engine's on fire. They've lost an engine. So you must be at an altitude where you're able to, navigate. So you're not hitting, vehicle structure, open assembly of air, congested area, any of this stuff. So whatever altitude you need to be at to be able to land safely and not cause any harm to that. That's the overarching rule there. All right, then we have congested area. So you must fly 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within 2,000 feet horizontal radius from that obstacle. So if your course takes you within 2,000 feet, which is about a third of a mile of an obstacle, you need to be 1,000 feet above or higher. An easy way to plan this is just to plan to always be at least 1,000 feet over the highest obstacle anywhere kind of near your route. So when you're looking at your aeronautical charts, you draw your route for your cross country plan. Each grid actually lists the highest obstacle altitude, terrain or obstacle altitude, plus like a couple 100 feet. It kind of rounds up. I can't remember the exact way they round up, but we have that listed in the course. And so you can just use that altitude if you just want to be safe, right? And or you can just look through the obstacles along your route and just make sure 1,000 feet above. That's an easy way to meet this, but it is when you're within 2,000 feet horizontal radius of that obstacle. So all the way around it, you got to be 1,000 feet above it. All right, so that's in congested areas, right? So we have congested areas, we have like open air assembly of people or like the city or town, right? So if you're within, you got to kind of look at this if as if it was 3D. So if we're like flying kind of at the height of this building or plus or minus 1,000 feet of the height of this building or these people, and we're 2,000 feet from it, then we have to go 1,000 feet. So if we're flying 2,000 feet within these people, we got to be 1,000 feet above them. If we're flying within 2,000 feet radius of this building, then we got to be at 1,000 feet above that, kind of up here where this aircraft is. All right, the next one is other than congested. You must fly no lower than 500 feet above the surface unless you're over open water or a sparsely populated area. So you cannot fly lower than 500 feet above ground unless you are over open water or a sparsely populated area. Then you can. Okay, so what does this look like? So if you're not, so we have a sparsely populated area over here, we have open water over here, and we have a vehicle vessel like with this boat. So you can fly lower than 500 feet if you're not near this boat and you're just over open water, right? Like this says here. Or if you're over here and you're not near the sparsely populated area, you're over ground, but you're not near a sparsely populated area, you're over just like some rolling grassy hills with no one in sight, no structures or vehicles or anything like that, then you can fly lower than 500. But if you were to be, over the sparsely populated area or over this boat, then that is a little bit different, and that's what we'll get to here. So in the cases where you are over open water or a sparsely populated area, you must not fly closer than 500 feet to any person, vessel, vehicle, or structure. So in this case, we are sparsely populated and there is a structure here. There's a house and there's also a vehicle. So we got to be 500 feet in any direction from that. So if we flew at the height of this house for some reason, we would have to be 500 feet away from the house or the car, it's in any direction. It's not just a vertical distance from it. It could be sideways. You got to stay 500 feet away from it. Same thing if we're over open water and there's a vessel like a boat, then you got to be 500 feet away in any direction from that boat. So you can't just whiz by, 100 feet from this boat and scare the bejesus out of them. You have to be 500 feet away. And that is only when you are in open water or sparsely populated area. And it's talking about, again, structure, vehicle, vessels, or people. And then if you're over open water or sparsely populated area and you're not in those areas, then you can fly below 500 feet. But again, you have to make sure that if your engine comes out, you can safely land with any undue hazards to any, people, buildings, anything like that. All right, so let's see if you guys have some questions. Looks like we gained a couple people, so that's great. Bill and Scott, welcome in. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I'll give it about a minute or so to see if you guys have any questions. We'll also do this at the end of all the subjects. So if you don't have a question now, but you think of one later, no worries. When is the next session on Zoom? I'm not quite sure. When that'll be, hope it'll be within the next 2 weeks, though, either next week or the week after, depending on what my schedule is coming up. But I'll email that out, and it's going to be at 4 p.m. I tried to do everything on 4 p.m. at Thursdays, but the last two Thursdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, I couldn't do it. So it's been a couple weeks, so I wanted to get a live lesson in, so that's why we're doing it here on Saturday. So it'll probably be hopefully next Thursday, but I'm not quite sure. So I got to look at things. So just stay tuned for that, and I'll email that out like I did for this one the week of. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so continue on. If you have a question, just put it in the chat, and I'll get to it at the end. But we're going to continue on here, and let's talk about aircraft maintenance. So this is from FAR 43.7. Authorized persons for aircraft maintenance is what I want to talk about first. So a private pilot is allowed to perform maintenance on an aircraft with some major exceptions. So one, you're only allowed as a private pilot to perform preventative maintenance. So the key word here is preventative. And then you're only allowed to perform that preventative maintenance on an aircraft that you own, that private pilot owns or operates. This means as a private pilot, you will not be allowed to perform required inspections such as the 100-hour or annual inspections, among many other things. And we'll get into that. Either an inspection authorized mechanic or an airframe and power plant mechanic must perform and sign off on 100-hour inspections, and only an inspection authorized mechanic must perform and sign off on annual and other annual inspections. There's also other inspections that require a mechanic, 100 hours, annuals, airworthiness directives, and like the aviates of all those inspections, the VOR and the transponder and things like that. They require the appropriate notation and signature in the aircraft maintenance records by these certified mechanics. So a private pilot can't do those sort of inspections. It has to be a certified mechanic, and there's specific certified mechanics that you can see for either the annual or the 100-hour. So preventative maintenance. So what can a private pilot who owns or operates an aircraft, their own aircraft, do in terms of maintenance in that aircraft? Well, they can do preventative maintenance, right? So what is that? Well, the FAR 43.7, it lists a lot of examples. You do not have to memorize this list. I don't want you guys to think that you have to memorize this list. The FAA Written, to my knowledge, doesn't ask a ton of questions on this. But for your check ride, you might get a check ride oral exam question that says, can you do maintenance as a private pilot? And you would say, well, I have to own or operate my own aircraft. But if so, I can do preventative maintenance. And then the examiner might ask, like, well, what are some examples of preventative maintenance? Or what is preventative maintenance? And we'll talk about that here. So maybe if you kind of get a general idea, maybe give one or two examples for your check ride. That's all you need to do. You don't need to memorize all of these. You can just say, well, I can look that up in 43.7 for the complete list of examples. All right, so I'm not going to read all these off, but these are all the ones that are listed in 43.7. So I'll just read off some examples: removal, installation, and repair of landing gear tires, servicing landing gear wheel bearings, such as cleaning and greasing, replacing safety wire or cotter keys, lubricating, which does not require disassembly. This is a key word you're going to see over and over again, not requiring disassembly or removal. Simple fabric patches, replenishing hydraulic fluid, refinishing coating on fuselage. Again, doesn't include disassembly of any primary structure or operating system. Applying preservative and protective material, repairing upholstery, making small, simple repairs to fairings. Again, no changes, the changes contour and don't interfere with proper airflow. Replacing safety belts. Let's see, replacing bulbs, reflectors, and lenses in position and landing lights. Replacing wheels and skis where no weight and balance computation is involved. That's another key one. You can't change the weight and balance computation when you make these changes. Let's see here. Replacing any hose connection except hydraulic connections. Cleaning or replacing fuel and oil strainers or filter elements. And you can also obviously refill the oil and check the oil. Updating of GPS database. This is a big one, a common one that a lot of private pilots who own and operate their own aircraft will do. Replacing and servicing batteries. So you kind of get the example. None of this is like, taking out a box or an instrument, right? Or disassembling it, tearing anything down and building it back up, unconnecting wires or anything like that. Let's see here. The installations of anti-misfueling devices, inspection and maintenance tasks are prescribed and specifically identified as preventative maintenance in a primary category aircraft type certificate. So if it's listed as preventative maintenance in the type certificate for the aircraft, and then this is an interesting one. Removing and replacing self-contained front instrument panel-mounted navigation and communication devices that employ tray-mounted connectors that connect the unit. So that is a lot of words to describe one thing. So what is a self-contained front instrument panel-mounted navigation and communication device that employs tray-mounted connectors? Well, this is like some communication or navigation device, like a radio transponder or something like that, that literally just pops in and out. You can just eject it, right? And you take it out and you just replace a newer model or one that actually works if it's broken, and you just pop it back in. So something like that, that literally the only action you're doing is popping out and popping back in. It's like a panel mounted, where is it say? Employ tray mounted connectors, right? That connect the unit when the unit is installed. So that's how I think of it when I think of that. All right. So one example missing in this example from the FAR that is known as a preventative measure that private pilots who own or operate their aircraft can perform is adjusting the zero indicator on the vertical speed indicator. And this could be a question that you get. I've seen questions out there, practice questions out there that say, what's the one instrument that a private pilot can adjust? Well, they don't include that you have to own or operate your aircraft, but it is the vertical speed indicator. So what happens is sometimes this needle, it'll hang. I guess it could go up as well, but it'll most likely hang when you're on the ground. Obviously, you're not climbing. You don't have a vertical speed while you're on the ground. So you need to re-zero it before you take off. And they have this little knob here, which you can turn with a screwdriver, and you can just kind of spin it and it'll kind of bring that needle back up and you can zero it out. That is something, because it's just right out here, it doesn't include taking this out, disassembling it, taking the faceplate off or taking out and messing with the back of it, because you can just take a little screwdriver, spin that, and it just moves this up to zero it. That's something that a private pilot who owns or operates their own aircraft is allowed to do as preventative type maintenance. All right, so continuing on, let's talk about the logbook entry. So we got an aircraft maintenance logbook here, all preventative maintenance. So if you're a private pilot, you own your own aircraft, you want to do preventative maintenance, you got to log it in the maintenance logbook, and you got to include the description of what you did, date of completion, and then, sorry that I kind of cut this off, but signature, certificate number, and kind of certificate of person who performed the work. And this should not be here, but this logbook entry and signature returns the aircraft to service, and the ultimate responsibility for ensuring that maintenance personnel or yourself make the appropriate entries in this maintenance log lies with the owner or operator of the aircraft, which in this example would be you. Excuse me. All right, so yeah, description of work, date of completion, and signature, certificate number, and kind of certificate of person who performed the work. And the person responsible is the person who owns or operates the aircraft. So in this example, the person responsible for making sure that this logbook entry is made, would be you. Student pilots or recreational pilots are not allowed to perform preventative maintenance. So it has to be a private pilot or a commercial pilot certificated person. And I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe sport pilots can do it as well. But again, don't quote me on that off the top of my head. All right. So any questions you guys have on maintenance or even before on minimum safe altitudes? If not, no worries. I'll give you guys about a minute or so just to see if anything comes to mind. If it comes to mind later, no worries. Just drop it in the chat. Yes, you can change your own oil. Change your own oil. Not just refill your own oil. Let's see here. I don't think you can change your own oil. That's a good question. A lot of these are, this is one of the most kind of confusing FARs, what I found that a lot of questions come like on Facebook groups and things like that because it is kind of vague. They just say like a private pilot can do preventative maintenance if they own their own aircraft, and then they just give these examples, and that's pretty much it. They don't really tell a specific guideline. But let's see what it said on the actual words on the oil. Cleaning or replacing fuel and oil strainers or filter elements. So I would say I'm not a big mechanic gearhead type, so I don't know what even I don't even know how to do my car oil. I always get that done for me, but I don't know what's involved in doing your own oil. Yeah, so you can change the filter. Um, so I guess if you can refill it and change the filter, if that's all that's involved in changing the oil, as long as you're not having to disassemble anything, I would say yes. Good question. Give it about a minute, see if anyone has any other questions. All right, so ChatGPT says that it includes replacing engine oil. Yeah, ChatGPT can be wrong, but I that fits with what I believe, so I'm gonna say yes. Hmm. All right, we'll move on. Again, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat. All right, let's talk about supplemental oxygen. So oxygen changes with altitude. The oxygen content in the air decreases with altitude. As altitude increases, so this we're saying altitude, increases as this little bar goes up, right? The density of the air decreases, as you can see. So density is the amount of something per volume. So as you can see, the amount of these blue and red dots, which are, let's say they're nitrogen and oxygen atoms, they decrease. So if blue is oxygen or maybe red is, I think, yeah, because I think there's more nitrogen in the air, right? Yeah. So let's say red is oxygen. As you can see, the more we go up, it gets less dense. There's less amount of them per volume. So there's literally less oxygen as we get higher for us to breathe. A pilot needs oxygen. If they don't get it, they can become hypoxic and can lose muscle control, get dizzy, lose mental capacity, pass out, or even die. And we talk about this in the human factor section of our course, which we'll get to, later. We talk about hypoxia and all the dangers that come with hypoxia. There's different things that can cause it. There's high altitudes where the oxygen is just lower. There is cold temperatures, high G forces, alcohol consumption or drugs. There's a lot that can cause basically the transfer of oxygen through your blood to your heart and lungs and your cells. And that's what makes you hypoxic. So literally just being at high altitudes can make you hypoxic. So the FAA has rules for certain altitudes to require pilots to bring oxygen with them to breathe. So like an oxygen mask, right? So what are these altitudes? Well, there's three kind of distinguishing altitudes that the FAA talks about. There's 12,500 feet, there's 14,000 feet, which is this line here, and there's 15,000 feet, this line here. Below 12,500 feet, MSL, no supplemental oxygen is required. However, even though it's not required, it doesn't mean that if you're flying at 12,000 feet, 11,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 9,000 feet, that it is a good idea to have supplemental oxygen with you. Most general aviation aircraft, they're Service ceilings are around 10,000 feet, and you may probably never get up to that high. You may fly 6,000 feet. So if you're doing that, you probably don't need supplemental oxygen. But if you go higher than 6,000 feet, it gets considerable. You can actually, if you've ever been that high on a mountain on a hike or something, like Mile High City in Denver, you can tell. Like I used to play basketball games and I went to Denver and I got tired much quicker when we played in Denver. It's a real thing, and that's because there's less oxygen. So just because the FAA doesn't require it doesn't mean you shouldn't bring it along with you to be safe. Again, another thing to just do and make sure you're going the extra mile to be extra safe in your aircraft. So if you plan on flying, even above 5,000 feet, just buy a little supplemental oxygen. They have these little cans too that you can just kind of suck in if you need it, something like that. I would highly recommend it. All right, so between 12,500 feet and 14,000 feet, the rule is that the required minimum flight crew, so that includes the pilot, after 30 minutes, so you're flying around, let's say you climb into above 12,500 feet at 2 p.m., and then you level off at 13,000 feet, so you're within this band. And at 2:30, so after 30 minutes of being in this band, after that, it's required that the minimum flight crew has supplemental oxygen. So after 30 minutes, the whole time that you remain here, you have to have it. But the first 30 minutes, so if you were to just climb at 13,000, climb to 13,000, fly there for 20 minutes, and then drop back down, technically you wouldn't need it. It wouldn't be required for you. Again, I wouldn't recommend that, but that is the rule. Then we have between 14,000 and 15,000 feet MSL. The required minimum flight crew must have it at all times so that you don't get that 30-minute buffer. So as soon as you climb above 14,000 feet MSL, all required minimum flight crew has to have supplemental oxygen. All right. And then as you go above 15,000 feet, it has to be present for each and every occupant at all times. So not just the flight crew. So the flight crew has to use it above 15,000 feet, but then all the occupants and passengers have to have it present for them to use it. They're not required to use it, but they have to have the ability to be able to use it. It has to be present for them. So that's why on airliners, they have the oxygen masks that drop in case of emergency. Now, airliners and aircraft that are pressurized have a little bit different rules, and you'll talk about that in like IFR and commercial certificates. We're not going to talk about that here. We're going to keep it simple because we're going to assume you're not flying in pressurized aircraft. But yeah, so that's just a little bit because they pressurize it, they're pumping oxygen in, so the rules are a little bit different for you there. But that is why they do have that oxygen at each seat on like an airline. Sorry about that. All right. Let's see if you guys have any questions about that. All right. This next section is pretty quick, just on scuba diving. So we'll just cover this and then we'll be finished kind of early. So we'll just open it up to any questions you guys have about training or ground school or anything like that. Give you a chance to kind of open it up. So let's talk about scuba diving. So why are we talking about scuba diving for pilots? Well, the main reason is decompression sickness. So, and this is all around like hypoxia and the oxygen in your blood and actually nitrogen in your body and blood. So scuba diving can cause decompression sickness that lingers in the body for several hours. When diving to depths of water, like ocean or lake or whatever, the body experiences increased pressure. We've all, dove down to the bottom of a pool and felt this. This increase in pressure causes the body to absorb more oxygen. If pressure is then reduced rapidly, the nitrogen can turn gaseous and create bubbles in the tissue and blood. So there's two types of like, depending on the depths, when you scuba dive, they'll have, if it's certain depth, then you got to have decompression stops because where you got to slow when you come back up, you got to like pause every once in a while and decompress. Otherwise, if you go too fast, it's going to turn gaseous and really, really be a problem because it's going to create bubbles in your tissue and blood. And then certain other depths, you don't have to do those decompression stops because it's not as deep, right? So it's not as of a danger. So symptoms of decompression sickness include difficulty breathing, skin rash, itchy skin, muscle pain, dizziness, loss of vision, and unconsciousness. Again, sorry about the spelling here, unconsciousness. So if obviously if we're having any of these symptoms, we don't want to fly. So this is why the FAA talks about scuba diving. Also, I think they talk about scuba diving because a lot of pilots also scuba dive. I think it's like just kind of the adventurous part of pilots that they want to see the highest part and they want to see the lowest part of the earth. I don't know, but I think that's another reason why the FAA talks about it. All right, so it's not exactly a regulation, uh, the scuba diving. It's more of a recommendation that the FAA gives in the Aeronautical Information Manual or the AIM. And because of the decompression sickness, the AIM recommends a pilot or passenger who intends to fly after scuba diving should allow the body sufficient time to rid itself of excess nitrogen during diving. So, what do they recommend? Well, the FAA recommends that you wait after scuba diving a certain amount of time before flying. So, if a dive does not require a controlled ascent, so there's no decompression stops that I was telling you about, and your flight is at or below 8,000 feet, okay, so you're not flying above 8,000 feet, then they recommend you wait 12 hours. If the dive required a controlled ascent, so it did require those decompression stops because it was a lot deeper, more dangerous, and you're flying below, your planned flight is below 8,000 feet, you need to wait 24 hours, right? So because you had to do a controlled ascent, that's because you have more nitrogen built up, so you need to wait longer. And then no matter whether you have a decompression stop dive or not, but if you're flying above 8,000 feet, because the oxygen and the pressure changes so low above 8,000 feet, then they still recommend waiting the full 24 hours. All right. Open it up to questions and questions about anything you guys want. It can be on stuff today. We finished kind of early. Got to get better at judging how long these are going to take. I guess it depends on the questions. So that's kind of hard to judge, but so yeah, I'll let you guys just think of any questions you might have. I'm here for the next, right, 25, 30 minutes for you guys. So any questions you guys have, you guys want to pull up your course, look at the past lessons you guys have done, maybe something you wrote in your notes that was something you couldn't figure out. I'm here. Next time we're gonna talk about flight planning, talk about airport light signals. So this is if your radio goes down, you have a loss of radio communication. How do you talk to ATC? Well, they actually have specific light signals, and each light signal has a different meaning. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about land and hold short operations. What are those? So that's when you have kind of intersecting runways and people that fly in small planes that can stop really quickly. Um, they may ask you to land and then hold short of that intersecting runway. But do you want to do that, or not? Because it might, if you're a new student pilot or something and you're trying to land and hold short, that makes it more difficult. Landing could be dangerous for you. So can you say no to that? We'll talk about that. The answer is yes, you can say no. Night definitions. We've already talked about several night definitions through the regulations. The FAA has 3 different ones. So we'll kind of recap those and say cover all the night definitions and which regulations they talk about. And then we'll cover incidents, accidents, and emergencies. So if something, God forbid, happens, right, and it's an incident, or it could be a serious incident, they call it. And this is all from the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, which, they investigate accidents and things like that. Or it could be an accident. So what do you do if any of these happen? And what's the damage type, all those things around that. What's some examples of those things? Not something that you get a ton of questions on in terms of being tested on. But again, kind of one of those check ride questions you might get where your examiner might ask you, a general question about those. So something we definitely need to cover, but not something you have to memorize everything for. Anyways, let's see if there's any questions. If not, no worries, but let me know. I'll just be sitting here waiting on the chat. Yeah, Scott, no problem. I try to do right now we're doing a series on, the private pilot rules and regulations. Because in the bonus downloads and videos course, we have a lot of live lesson recordings. And I kind of went through and I was like, what have I not covered in these? And I try to do those like once a month or so and I usually kind of ask students what topics they want. And, after a while you get kind of repeat topics. So I wanted to see what topics we hadn't covered yet. And a lot of these kind of rote memorization things like on rules and regulations, we hadn't covered yet, which makes sense because, you read it and you're like, okay, I get it. I just need to remember it. But there are some subtleties to these things. So I did want to cover these rules and regulations in live lessons. So I thought, hey, we'll do a series of these once every week or 2 weeks or something and just get these out there and then recorded for people to go in there and watch them if they miss them or whenever. I guess on Saturday, yeah. So less participants today on Saturday. I mean, that makes sense. So sorry about that. Thank you for spending some of your Saturday with me. You guys are definitely dedicated, so I appreciate that. And I'll try to have them on, way back when I started doing this, I played around. I did polls on, which by the way, doing a poll and asking people when is the best time doesn't work because everybody, no, not everybody is going to be happy. So I just picked something that like looked to be the best and I tried a few things out way back when, and it just seemed like 4 p.m. Pacific was kind of the best for everybody and a weekday. So that's why I've kind of done 4 p.m. Pacific on Thursdays. So I'll try and keep to that this week, though. As I said, the last couple of weeks I've been traveling, so that's been tough. Um, yes, you can review previous broadcasts. So if you go into your dashboard, you click on My Courses from your student dashboard, and then find the private pilot bonus, a bonus downloads and video course. So all of you guys here, if you haven't checked that out, there's a ton of stuff in there. So there's all the FAA PDFs in there, like the PHAC and all that you can download. But then there's all our PDFs, probably like 12 of them. There's the cross country planning ebook you can download. There's the ultimate private pilot test prep book that you can download as a PDF that comes with your course that we used to sell separately for $37. We don't sell that anymore. Just because Amazon was taking such a huge cut of it, I kept having to raise the price. So it was just, I don't know, silly. So I was like, I'll just include this as a PDF for free in the course. So, anyways, There's cross-country planning guide. There's things for your knee board, all that stuff. But then if you scroll down to the bottom, there's every live lesson that we've ever had. We recorded that and place those in there. So you can scroll through and then we title them to say what kind of subjects we catch. So if you're kind of looking for more information on a subject, just scroll through there and kind of see, if it's on VORs, we've done a few on VORs. If it's weight and balance, look for one on weight and balance. Um, and yeah, it's a live lesson, taking questions. Sometimes it's good to hear other people's questions, things like that. So yeah, it's inside your bonus downloads and videos course. You can get to that from your dashboard and then my courses. Good question. And reach out if you, for some reason, you can't find that. I can send you the link, but pretty simple, I think. All righty. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you for doing this. I look forward. Yes, thank you for coming, Ray. Appreciate you coming on a Saturday. Appreciate all you guys. Good luck. Keep it going. Thank you, Myron. All right. Yeah, so no other questions. You guys have a great rest of your weekend and be on the lookout for either next week, hopefully next week, but if not, definitely the week after. We'll do the last live lesson on private pilot rules and regulations. Last one of the series. All right. See you guys.